Hello, my loves, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name is Ruby. I'm a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, archetypal astrologer, sound healer, and Magdalene priestess. Those are just a few of the hats that I wear. And today I want to talk about Mary Magdalene and the path of remembrance. What does it mean to remember on the Magdalene path? Now, I do have an announcement. I am going to be shifting my focus when it comes to content creation to YouTube. This has been a message I've been receiving from my guides for a while now. And I've been a little stubborn and not listening because, I'm a Taurus. I crave comfort and I like the known. And so, most of my content around the true teachings of Jesus and the true teachings of Mary Magdalene currently live on TikTok. My username there is Cosmic Taurus Fairy. So I think I'm going to be keeping that account up. But when it comes to, where I'm talking about these living teachings, these living transmissions, most of that is going to now live here. Now, if you love the content around kind of tarot decks and oracle decks, I'm not going to leave that behind. I have a few of those videos kind of lined up to film in the next kind of few weeks, so you can keep an eye out for that. But there's been this fire lit under me to really share the Magdalene wisdom stream and to really share these teachings and these transmissions. And TikTok has just felt so energetically dense lately. I'm like avoiding being on there. Whenever I open that app, I usually end up regretting it and just getting a feeling that it's going to become more and more that way. And so just having a little bit of pivot in where I'm showing up. And this change and this metamorphosis is, such a part of my path, right? Like at this point, I should just understand that I am never gonna stay in one place too long because Mary Magdalene is my primary guide. And Mary Magdalene is a resurrection goddess. And that means she rules cycles of death and rebirth. And so if we have a lot of Pluto in our chart, there is a high chance that we are going to be drawn to working with a resurrection archetype, right? Now, even if you don't have, a heavy Pluto influence in your chart, this might still resonate. So I'm not saying that that is kind of the only indicator that you are on a path of evolution and transformation this lifetime, but there is some correlation, right? I've got Pluto in my first house. I'm a Pluto Sun opposition. Pluto is touching a lot of placements in my natal chart. And the natal chart really being this holographic, diagram, this holographic, morphogenetic field that really shows us our inner energetics and our kind of map for who we are becoming this lifetime. And so the natal chart can indicate to us an area that we are coming into remembrance around, okay? And that really kind of segueing into what I want to talk about today, okay? So Mary Magdalene, as a resurrection goddess, right, rules over death and rebirth, okay? And we see kind of Mary Magdalene anointing Christ's body for burial. So she takes the alabaster jar and she anoints him. This is heavily symbolic. This is a priestess rite. She anoints Yeshua. And then she is the witness to his crucifixion, and she prepares him for burial, and then again is the original witness to Christ's return in his light body, in his new ascended form. And so on our path, Mary Magdalene can serve in a similar role as this midwife, this doula of death and rebirth. And so she often shows up in our life when we are being initiated into a new level of consciousness, when we are being initiated into a new form. Okay. And for those of us that, again, if we work closely with Mary Magdalene, we work closely with another resurrection goddess like Isis or Set, or we have a lot of Pluto in our chart, or a Pluto first house, a Pluto sun, a Pluto moon, right? We don't stay static. We are constantly in this flux of transformation, of death and rebirth. Well, what does that have to do with remembrance? On the Magdalene path, death and rebirth is a process of moving closer to holy origin. What do I mean by that? Right? On the path of the Magdalene, we learn who we are and who we are not. Okay. So in the canonical gospels, and when I say canonical gospels, I mean Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the accounts of Christ's life that were included in the book we call the Bible. Okay. When we first meet Mary Magdalene, Christ is cleansing her of what is called in the canonical gospels 7 demons, right? Now, the church has used this story to malign Mary Magdalene. Oh, she must have been so sinful, right? That she had all of these demons that she needed to be cleansed from. Well, 7 is a very symbolic number in ancient teachings, in Hermetic teachings, in mystery teachings, right? 7 is the number of the major chakras, the major energy centers in our body. We have more than 7 chakras, but those are the chakras that coincide with the central channel of our body. The central channel being really important in the true teachings of Christ and Mary Magdalene. Maybe that's a topic for another video. If that interests you, leave that in the comments. Okay. There was also 7 classical planets. Now we work with more celestial bodies in astrology, but 7 core classical planets, 7 days of the week, right? And this cleansing of 7 demons is allegory. It is symbolic of being cleansed from elements of human experience that keep us in ignorance. Now, we see this cleansing of the 7 demons in the canonical gospels mirrored in the Gospel of Mary, which is not included in the Bible, mostly for reasons of politics and patriarchy. Okay, just because it isn't included doesn't mean that it has less merit. In fact, we could make an argument that because it isn't included, that it might have more merit, that there's teachings that are so powerful that politically they weren't included, because they might, keep the church body from being easily subjugated or controlled. Okay. And in the Gospel of Mary, these powers that Mary Magdalene comes into contact with are these aspects of ego that keep us from remembrance, right? And as we dialogue with these powers and we integrate them, we come into closer contact with our origin, who we really are. Okay. So each time in the Gospel of Mary that Mary Magdalene confronts one of these powers, we could say she experiences an ego death, right? Now, one of these powers in the Gospel of Mary is called ignorance, right? Sometimes I think of this as forgetfulness, in the sense that we have forgotten who we really are, right? And this ignorance of who we really are keeps us in this false reality. Because if we don't know who we really are, then we aren't living in truth. We're living in a mirage, right? Now, I'm going to read this point specifically, or this point where Mary Magdalene specifically dialogues with ignorance. I'm reading from Mary Magdalene Revealed, but this is from the Gospel of Mary itself. I just really like the translation that's found in this book. Mary 9:8-13. The soul came to the third power, which is called ignorance. It examined the soul closely, saying, "Where are you going? You are bound by wickedness." And the soul said, "Why do you judge me, since I have not passed judgment?" Right? Now, what's really interesting is that it is ignorance itself that says you are bound by wickedness, right? So it's like this is almost a read of the original sin teachings, right? It is ignorance that tells us that what we are bound by is wickedness, as opposed to just forgetfulness, right? So this is a whole, we could take this teaching in a whole other direction, right? About how kind of the judgment of our beingness that religious church dogma indoctrinates us into is a false teaching that keeps us from accessing our original nature. But we're not going to go in that direction today, right? Instead, we're going to talk about, what does it mean to orient ourselves from a place of ignorance? And then how do we reorient ourselves to remembrance, all right? So if we are indoctrinated, in maybe a childhood of church dogma, whether that's, evangelicalism or Catholicism, we're often taught that we were born bad, that we were born sinful, right? So that's a place of ignorance. But if we are just born into a Western model of thinking, we are taught that we are material beings having a material experience. And reductionist scientific materialism really teaches us that not only are we material beings having a material experience, that to kind of think otherwise is fantasy. To kind of take some other approach outside of scientific materialism is to maybe be a little silly. Okay. And so we're taught that scientific materialism is common sense. And we are taught to orient ourselves to really this way of thinking that says, you are what's on the surface. That's who you really are. And so ignorance is really what we are operating in until we wake up and remember. Okay. I hired this really, really lovely person to kind of help me in, my website and graphic design and my logo and all of these things that I really cannot do on my own and have no desire to do on my own. And in the process, we've been really having these conversations about, who I am and what I offer. Like, what am I really teaching? What am I really offering? And this word that really came up that was in such alignment was reclamation, right? Because so many people find me that, like me, were raised in organized dogmatic religion or have a background in organized dogmatic religion. And some of the work that I do is I, create a container where one can reclaim the wisdom teachings of Christ and Mary Magdalene, kind of stripped from the dogma, stripped from the distortion. But the path of Mary Magdalene spirituality alone, standing alone, is this path of reclamation, as well as a path of remembrance. And what we are remembering and what we are waking up to is that we aren't just solely material beings, that we are divine beings, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so our work in these human bodies is to really come into balance with our divine self and our human self. And part of this process is this kind of cyclical path of cleansing and releasing what is not aligned with the divinity, and then returning to divinity, right? And so it's this process of coming into true power being our divinity. And as we come into true power, we cleanse ourselves of what is disempowering and what is distorting, right? The symbol of baptism being such a potent symbol on this path, right? It's like we are being cleansed of, and we are dying to what is false, what is ignorant. And we are awakening to our true nature and our true origin, which is, our heavenly parents, right? The word that is translated to our Heavenly Father in Aramaic is actually non-dual, right? In Aramaic, that word could be translated to, great birther or womb of creation. And so, Christ wasn't teaching, salvation through submitting to and obeying this patriarchal God, right? That's the distortion of these teachings. What Christ was actually teaching was how to come into a process of awakening, remembering, and reclaiming our true spiritual ancestry, which is that we don't just come from an earthly parentage, that we have a divine source, okay? And it is through that remembrance that we wake up to what you might call spiritual gifts, And it's this process then of saying, okay, so, the mind isn't the source of wisdom, but it's the heart. It's through coherence in the heart that I can receive and I can also give. Okay. Now, I'm feeling called to take this in a place I wasn't originally going to take it, but I am. Okay. So, I'm currently training in this modality of sound healing that is, really opening me up to seeing how all of these different hats that I wear, right? Priestess, psychic medium, archetypal astrologer, sound healer. It's like all of these kind of different hats. The current modality that I'm learning and I'm training under right now is showing me how all of these different hats really sync up. Okay. And in the cosmology of this training that I'm doing in the specific sound healing modality, we work within what is called the biofield. You might also call this the aura or the energetic field, or my favorite, the morphogenetic field and the morphic field. And when we're working within the biofield, right, we come into contact in the biofield with kind of past traumas in stuck energy. And as I'm working kind of with this modality and I'm, combing people's fields, and I'm kind of finding places in the field where there's a snag, I'm like, this is the Mary Magdalene work. This is the path of the powers. This is the path of Mary Magdalene being cleansed of 7 demons. Because what happens is we experience these traumas or these fractures. And instead of orienting from self, from divine self, we start to orient from these places. And we say, okay, I was rejected at this really harsh way when I was 20, and there's been no integration of this experience. And so this is living in my energy field now, because in this modality, our memories don't live in our brain, our memories live in our field, which makes a lot of sense why you might keep attracting your past into your present and your future, right? You're carrying it around with you unintegrated. It's in incoherence. And in this work that we do, we bring coherence back to these places of incoherence, and we essentially are working at kind of this repatterning process. And so much of the work we do on the Magdalene path is this work of alchemy. Mary Magdalene really as this symbol of the alchemist. And she teaches us how to meet these points in our field that are keeping us in story, that are keeping us attached to a false identity. And she shows us how to bring these places back into harmony. There's also this process in this modality that I'm teaching around, kind of into the opening of the healing process. We work with the central channel of the body. See, I knew I was going to be talking about this today. And we open up and we adjust the Earth Star chakra. And I've always referred to this chakra as the Soul Star chakra, but in this modality, it's called the Sun Star. Now, the Earth Star is kind of the negative charge to this battery, and the Sun Star is the kind of positive edge to this battery. This is the divine masculine and the divine feminine, right? Christ is the Logos. Christ is a solar deity. Christ is a sun god, right? And Mary Magdalene is always connected to earth, right? You know, her wisdom teaching is the teaching of being fully human and fully divine. And so Christ and Mary Magdalene, not just these figures or these teachers, they are these symbols of, of what it means to be fully embodied and fully tapped in to our origin and to who we really are. And that by connecting in to the true teachings of Christ and connecting in to the true teachings of Mary Magdalene, we don't just learn from them, we start to embody them and become like them. Okay. So, when we work on the Earth Star and the Sun Star chakras in this modality, most people's chakras are really tucked. Their Earth Star is really tucked. Their Sun Star is really tucked. And so part of the work of this modality is we kind of adjust these energy centers to kind of full vibrancy and full coherence. And in doing so, we really pull them out of a contracted, stuck place, right? Now, why are these energy centers stuck for people? Because they're bad? Because they're not spiritual? No. Because the paradigm that we live in, right, teaches us to not be in contact with these more transpersonal places of our field. And so when we are taught that we are just material beings, and that's who we really are, we kind of by nature, by osmosis, kind of block our connection to the transpersonal and to the divine. And then once we start working within the Earth Star, which is the Earth Star is the Magdalene. It's our connection to Mother. And the Sun Star, really the Logos, at higher spiritual light. The central channel of our body begins to flow. It begins to come into coherence. It begins to come into a place of flow. And once we start working within that place, right, we're not being so driven by the fractures in the field, or the snags in the field, or the places of discord in the field, right? So I think I'm gonna leave that there for today, okay? But I hope I gave you something to think about. That the path of Mary Magdalene is really the path of waking up to who you really are. It's the path of remembering who you really are. And this isn't just a one awakening experience. And I think that is kind of a flaw in the way we talk about spirituality in this kind of modern social media age, right? Everyone wants to know, like, when did you wake up, right? And for me, really, the process of awakening is this ever continual process. And that's really what we see in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, that kind of each time we integrate a power of the ego, each time we integrate a belief or a thought form or a pattern that's keeping us in samsara, that's keeping us in a pattern that is no longer serving us, right? Like a pattern that is reinforcing a false self or a false belief. We come into a deeper experience of awakening. And so awakening is actually remembering, right? And when I say the false self, there's no judgment, right? Now, I'm prone to still using a lot of judgmental, dualistic language. And that is because not only was I raised in a dualistic society, but the religion that I was kind of raised in was very heavily dualistic. And so I'm still in this process of kind of neutralizing my language. And that's something that I've thought about a lot, right? Is like, neutralizing our language doesn't mean we can't call out systems of oppression. Neutralizing our language doesn't mean that harmful and oppressive ideologies get a pass. And so that's something I want to bring up. A distortion of neutralizing our language is kind of allowing anything without discernment. And so I see this kind of being used and weaponized in harmful spirituality, right? But when it comes to ourself and our process, right, neutralizing our language can be so important, because a lot of us will shame ourselves and judge ourselves, and it just creates more and more and more fractures. Shame is like the densest, stickiest kind of being state there is. And so when we start to neutralize, how we feel about ourselves, a false self isn't bad. A false self isn't kind of evil or something to run away from. A false self is just kind of living under a belief that isn't true. Okay, so an example of a false self would be, a version of yourself that believes that you have to work really hard to attain love or attain security, right? That it always has to be really, really hard. Security comes only through like breaking your back, right? So that false self isn't evil. It's not bad. There's something wrong with that false self, but they're operating under information that isn't aligned with holy origin, okay? And so on the Magdalene path, we would meet that version of ourselves. We would work with that version of ourselves. We would reparent that version of ourselves until they've been integrated back into the remembrance and the truth of our nature, right? Which is that we are eternal beings. We are limitless beings. And we come to Earth School, right, to evolve our consciousness. So, every conflict, every challenge, every trial is an initiation into more remembrance and more reclamation of who we really are. I'm going to leave it there for now, but I'm excited to explore more of the true teachings of Christ, the true teachings of Mary Magdalene in this longer form content. I feel like we can cover a lot more. And I also have a Patreon. And that Patreon is now under $10 a month, and there's hours and hours and hours of content on there too. And so if you're looking for more, that might be a place to go next. I have a whole series on the Patreon. It's an ongoing series called Magdalene Witchcraft. And in that series, I really teach you how to work with your original nature, which is divinity, which is Christ consciousness, right? to live a magical life. So there's a protection module, there is a plant priestess module. You know, there's probably maybe 4 or 5 lessons or modules on Magdalene Witchcraft right now on the Patreon, and that's ever expanding. Like, my hope is to get, you know, a new kind of lesson in Magdalene Witchcraft kind of up on the Patreon, maybe once a month, every other month, if I'm, you know, really, really kind of moving through a lot in my life, because this isn't something that I just kind of want to throw together. This is something I want to put a lot of time and energy and intent into. And so for each Magdalene Witchcraft module, there is supplementary material. So my hope is that you can print it all out and start to build a grimoire for yourself, right? And how Magdalene Witchcraft differs from other types of magical practice is that it's all based around this idea of remembrance, right? That we don't need to craft our workings from this place of kind of fear or, you know, subjugation, but from this place of unification, right? So that might be a place to go next if you really align with what I am saying and you want to dive deeper. And I'm excited to continue this and to see you soon. So from my heart to yours, sending you love until we meet again.